Welcome to the Putting Your Business on the Map podcast. I'm your podcast host, Landon Blake, a land surveyor living and working in Central California. Happy to have you here. Let's go ahead and dive right into today's episode. The title of episode 16 is What Should You Do When Someone Quits? I'm not sure why I chose this topic. It's on a little bit of a different tack than the last few episodes, but it is important. It's an important topic. I've had probably 4 good people quit RH. We've been in business for 4 years, so I lose about 1 person a year. That's too many. I wish it was 0. I know it will never be 0, but I wish it was 0, and my goal is always to get it to 0. So it's hard when a good person leaves your business. I take it personally, probably more personally than I should. I get my feelings hurt. So it's difficult. But it's also a really important signal, and we're going to talk about that. It's an important event for your business, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about it. It can be, you can react to it well, or you can react to it poorly. You can handle it well, or you can handle it poorly. And so hopefully when you're done listening to this episode, if you're a manager or a business owner or a boss, you'll have some things to think about, how you can handle it the next time somebody quits, because they will. It's going to happen. And I would say, I don't want to beat myself up too much about that. The 4 people that I lost. One of those employees started a family. So I don't think there was a lot we could have done about that. But the other 3 I take responsibility for. I lost a really good team member because I didn't handle some problems that should have been handled. I didn't address the problems soon enough, and I lost a good person for that, and I regret that. And the other person I lost, I think probably was a bad hire. And we work really hard not to do that. And so one of the things that made me realize is I need to do a better job of interviewing, and I need to push a little more in the interview and selection process, respectfully and politely, to make sure we have a good fit. And so I've thought a lot about that, and I've worked with my HR person on that a little bit, and we made some changes to our interview process. So I'm talking to you today as somebody that has lost good people. That was preventable in most of the cases I'm talking about, and not just at RH, but I've been a manager at other companies and lost good people. And so that's tough, and you want to try and prevent it and keep it to a minimum. And then, so one of the ways that you can prevent it is when it happens, you got to think about why it happened, and that's what we're going to talk. Mostly this episode, we're going to talk about that. So I just want to let you know I am working on my word whiskers. I'm trying not to say and so be patient with me as I try and catch those and reduce the amount. One thing you find out when you start doing a podcast is how much you rely on your word whiskers, and so I'm trying to work on that. We'll try, and I said in the last episode, we'll try and keep the number of ums and uhs in this episode to under 30. I haven't counted them. I'll have to listen and start to count so I can see if I'm making progress. So just to give you an overview of what we're going to talk about today, I'm going to tell you a story about quitting a job, because I think it illustrates some of the principles that we'll talk about a little bit later in the episode. So I'll tell you a true story about quitting a job. Then we're going to talk about why is this an important signal, or you should pay attention when this happens. So we'll talk about as a manager or business owner, if somebody quits, that's a big deal, and you really need to pay attention. So we're going to talk about why. Why is that an important signal when someone quits? Then we'll talk a little bit about determining the causes when someone quits, because that's one of the most critically important things you can do after somebody quits, is determine why they're leaving. Then the last thing is we'll talk about what's the right way to respond when somebody quits. There's ways to do that graciously and with generosity and kindness and respectfulness. And then there's some horrible ways to do it. So we're going to talk about the good way to do it, hopefully. So you're losing a good person. How do you handle that? How do you react? So we'll talk about that, and then I'll tell you a story about when I had a good surveyor quit, and I think I handled it well, and so I want to tell you that story. There's been many times when I wouldn't say many. There's been several times when I haven't handled it well, but that is one time when I handled it well. So we'll close with that kind of positive story, I hope. All right. So I'm going to tell you about a story that happened to me when I quit a job as a surveyor. So it's a true story. And I'd worked at this place for a while, so more than a few years. And it was a rough departure. I was emotionally attached to my coworkers. They were like my family. I got treated very poorly there the last few years I worked there. Very poorly. I was way underpaid and way overworked. And so I was exhausted and frustrated and very ready for a change. But it was still very heartbreaking for me to leave. And so I gave my notice. So and I was a manager. I was a assistant survey department manager, and so when I gave my notice, I gave 4 weeks notice. I was trying to be kind to my employer, so I gave 4 weeks notice because I filled an important role there. I wanted them to have plenty of time. And when I gave my notice, they were really upset. There was some screaming and yelling, and some finger pointing. Not on my part, but I got screamed and yelled at. People were super upset, and I knew they would be. They were super upset. And I just want to tell you, they knew why I was leaving. We had talked about it on more than one occasion before I finally quit, and I gave them plenty of opportunity to address some of the issues we were having, and they just didn't want to do that. Now, the reason I tell you that is when I quit, I gave 4 weeks notice, and they asked me to do an exit interview. And we're going to do a PYB OTM on exit interviews, a little extra on exit interviews. But they asked me for an exit interview. And I told my boss, I said, I do not want to go to the exit interview. And he said, why don't you want to go to the exit interview? And I had a good relationship with my boss, my immediate supervisor. We were friends, and I cared about him a lot, and I respected him. I told him, I said, hey, I don't want to go to the exit interview because you guys already know why I'm leaving. You don't need to ask me that. I know nothing I say in the exit interview is going to change anything, because if you guys were going to change, you would have done it already. I'm not going to accept a counteroffer, so there's no point to sit down and give me a counteroffer. And I don't want a guilt trip. I don't need you guys to sit down and treat me like a horrible person because I'm leaving. I said, I don't have any idea what positive thing we're going to accomplish in the exit interview. So I said, I'm not going to the exit interview. And my boss's boss, one of the principals there, called me and said, you have to go to the exit interview. And I said, I don't know what planet you live on, but I absolutely don't have to go to the exit interview. I said, I don't have to do anything. I said, and if you get nasty with me, like, I don't need to show up tomorrow. Like, I've got a guy waiting for me to start my new job. So I was like, yeah, I like, you can stamp your foot and scream and yell all you want. I don't have to go to the exit interview. And this was part of why I was leaving, right? Is I got treated a little bit like a child there, and I had already quit. I give him my notice. Like, what do you mean I have to go to the exit interview? Says who? I just don't understand what they were thinking. And so I told the principal, I was like, yeah, no, not going to the exit interview. And if you don't like that, like, I'll come pack my desk tomorrow morning. And so my boss called me a little bit later and he said, hey, he said, you and I have been friends for a long time. He said, I've mentored you. He said, can you just do me a favor? Can you just go to this silly exit interview so I don't have to hear about it? And so I said, yeah, you know what? If you're asking me as a favor, like, I'll go to the exit interview, but, I already told you why I don't think it's going to do any good. But I said, I'll go. If you're asking me to go for you, I will go. Because I cared about him. So I went to the exit interview. Bad decision. Shouldn't have gone. But I did. I went to the exit interview. So I walk into the exit interview, and in the room is the principal that I told you about, my boss, and our CFO/HR person. And they sat me down, and they had my last paycheck, which was my last 2 weeks of pay, and I don't know, probably 6 weeks of vacation pay that they owed me. So it was a lot of money. And they sat down, and they had a stack of papers. They said, we'd like you to sign these papers. And so I started to look at the papers they wanted me to sign, and I signed most of the papers. I just, as a little sidebar here, a little side note, I just want to let you know, you don't have to sign any papers when you quit. So you don't have to do that. They can't make you do it. I was trying to be reasonable. So I signed, they wanted me to sign a paper that I didn't have any work-related injuries. They're having you sign stuff to reduce their liability. And most of what they asked me to sign was pretty reasonable. So I went ahead and signed it, even though I didn't have to. But I get down towards the bottom of the stack, and they basically had a paper, a form they wanted me to sign that basically said I wasn't going to compete with them. So it was like a non-compete agreement or restriction. And I looked at the principal and the HR person, and I said, I can't sign this paper. And they said, why not? And I said, well, first of all, I'm going to work for one of your direct competitors, so I can't sign a non-compete because I've already taken a job with one of your competitors. And I'm sorry, but I am probably going to compete with you guys in the future. Like, that's a risk you take when you lose a mid-level manager. And they said, well, if you don't sign this non-compete restriction, we're not going to give you your last 8 weeks of pay. And I was pretty surprised when they said that. I don't think I've ever been more angry in my life than I was at that moment. This is a place that I had worked a ton of uncompensated overtime for, and really, I gave them my heart and soul, and I could not believe that they were trying to blackmail me. And this is part of the reason why I didn't want to go to the exit interview, is I was a little bit worried that something like this might happen. And I distinctly remember I got up. I was so angry that my hands were shaking. I've never been the same. I don't think I've been that angry since. And I looked over at my boss, and I said, I'm really disappointed in you. I'm disappointed that you sat here next to me and you let them do this. And I said, I'm not signing a non-compete agreement. I said, it's illegal to even ask me to do that. And I said, you guys owe me my pay. So I left. And just to kind of tell you how the story ended, the new place I was going to work, the principal there was pretty savvy, and he suspected that they might try something like this because he'd had it happen before. And he told me, if they pull any shenanigans at your exit interview, you call me right away, and we'll get you in touch with our business attorney, and our business attorney can work with you. He said, whatever you do, don't sign anything that looks like a non-compete agreement. So I got him on the phone, and we got in touch with his attorney. And he told me, don't sign it, don't worry, we'll get you paid. You're going to get your pay, like whatever you do, don't sign that paper. So anyways, make a long story short, they ended up later in the day, my boss called me back and he says, hey, there was a big misunderstanding, you can come pick your check up, you don't have to sign the non-compete agreement. So, and I found out later through the grapevine, through some other people that worked there that I was friends with, that they called their attorney when I left, and he said, you better get that young man back in there and get him his check before he talks to somebody that knows what they're doing, or you're going to owe him 3 times as much. So anyways, they were stupid. They were foolish. Now, part of the reason I told you that story is that was a bad way to handle that quit. And I know they were upset, and I understand why they were upset, but that left a really horrible taste in my mouth, and potentially exposed them to a huge liability. Thankfully, they straightened out before things got out of hand, but it could have been really bad. And listen, part of what that teaches you is employers will try and bully you on an exit if you're not careful. If you're not working for a good place, they will try and strong arm you, and so you don't want to let that happen. So it wasn't pretty. It was a horrible exit interview. It left a really bad taste in my mouth. There's still some bad blood there for that reason and for other reasons. But one of the things that, in hindsight, I'm glad that it happened, because what it did was teach me how important it is to treat people well on their way out of your organization. And so that's part of what we're gonna talk about today. So when someone quits, give me just a second here. I'm going to take a drink of my tea. When someone quits, why is that an important signal? So that's the kind of the first main point of the episode. Why is that an important signal for you as a manager or business owner? Okay, well, there's only a few reasons why this is happening. One, the person has changed or their life has changed somehow, and I'll give you an example of that at the very end of the episode. Two, your business has changed somehow. Now that may have been a necessary change, or it might have been a change out of your control, but it's possible that your business has changed, and that's why the person's leaving. It's possible that that person wasn't a good fit for your business in the beginning. And as I mentioned before, one of the things you have to figure out is how did they get through your selection process if they were a poor fit. Or the fourth reason is they may have found a better opportunity somewhere else. And then one of the things you have to think about is, did they not have a good opportunity at your place? Now, you can't always match an offer from a competitor. I'm not telling you have to do that, but you should think about it. You should think about what was it about this other offer that appealed. And sometimes other companies make promises they're not going to keep too, and so you have to deal with that reality. But in any of those cases, you need to think about what's going on here. When someone quits, that is a huge signal that something important has happened, right? Something's changed in that person's life. Something's changed in your business. You hired somebody that wasn't a good fit to begin with, or they found a better opportunity somewhere else, and then you need to figure out why that happened. So a couple things I'm going to tell you here, and I know some people aren't going to like this and they're going to disagree with it, but I'm going to tell you anyways. This is almost certainly your fault as a leader. Period, full stop. If you're losing a good employee, you screwed up. And I think that should just be your baseline assumption as a manager or an owner. You should assume it's your fault and prove to yourself that it wasn't, because it probably was. So and another thing too, there was an 85% chance that this quit was preventable. I can't sugarcoat that for you. That's why we're talking about it on the episode today. So it's your fault and it was preventable, period. Just get that through your thick skull. If you're losing a good employee, there's a 95% chance you dorked something up. And not in a small way, in a big way. When I think about the good person I lost here at RH, that was a huge deal. That was one of my biggest screw-ups here as an owner, and I deeply regret it. So don't minimize this. Don't minimize this. It's an important signal, and you probably screwed something up. So you really need to think about it. And by the way, losing a good employee really hurts a small business, and it hurts a small business way more than it hurts a big business. I'm going to do a PYB O-Team extra about that for folks that support us on Patreon. I'm going to talk about why is this so detrimental to a small business. We'll look at some of the reasons, and we'll do a little bit of whiteboard math. Now, there are a couple. I want to be clear here for the rest of the episode. I'm not talking about when someone leaves during a trial period. Like you bring them on for a 60-day or 90-day trial period. You guys are going to try each other out, and they decide, hey, either you decide, hey, we don't think you're a good fit, or they decide, hey, this isn't right. This isn't the right place for me. That's okay. That happens. I've gotten more open to that. I've gotten more open to a trial period. I've realized, no matter how careful I am, I'm not always going to be able to figure everything out in the interview process. And so I've come to terms with, hey, we're going to hire some people. They're not going to make it the first 90 days. That's okay. one of the reasons I've come to terms with that, and maybe we talk about this in another PYBO Team Extra, is we're a unique place with a unique business model and a unique culture, and what that means is most people aren't going to be a good fit. And I didn't understand that when I started, and so now I realize I have to be more careful when I hire, and we got to just try some people out, because no matter how hard I try and explain what makes us unique in the interview process, some people just don't get it until they try it. And so that's okay. I'm not talking about people that leave, during an initial kind of probation or trial period. That's okay. I've come to accept that is going to happen. And I'm not talking about somebody who quits working for you because they got a 75-cent raise somewhere else. Okay, that is a bad decision by the employee almost always. It's short-sighted. I don't want you to stress about that. Now, I think you can avoid some of that by having regular and constructive conversations with your employees about compensation and what they can do to make more money. But if you're doing your part, if you have a fair and transparent compensation system and people understand what they need to do to make more money, and they're just going to leave because somebody else is going to pay them 75 cents or $1.25 more an hour, I don't think you should spend a lot of time stressing about that quit. And people do that, especially it seems like young people do that. I lost a person. The person left over, I don't know, $1.25 or $1.50, and I think they traded their good long-term opportunity here for a job that paid them a little bit more money in the short run, but was going to be drastically less money in the long run, and that's okay. Like I respected their right to do that. I don't think it was a good decision, and I didn't spend a ton of time stressing about that. Although I think if I'd have been a little more careful in the selection and interview process, I maybe could have avoided that. So I'm not talking about those two situations. Somebody leaves during an early exit period, or you got an employee that's just making a foolish decision over a little bit of money, short-term gain for a little bit of money, because that happens. What I'm talking about is a situation where you and the team member have made some pretty large investments in each other, because that is a lose-lose situation for the employee and for the business. And there's something that's called firm-specific capital. In other words, you invest in an employee, training and the time it takes for them to learn your systems and processes and your business and your clients, all that stuff, your culture. So you spend money on that, but then they also spend time and energy. They make an investment in learning your systems, your processes, your culture, your clients, and not all of that readily transfers to another job. So now some of it will transfer. Some of what they learn working for you will transfer to another survey company, but a big chunk of it won't transfer. It's specific to your firm. That's why they call it firm-specific capital. You can Google that term. It's time and money that both the employer and the employee have invested in the relationship that they can't take somewhere else. And so that's a dead weight loss when somebody quits. So, in my business and in my life, I'm always looking for win-win opportunities. I think that's one of the things that a lot of people do really poorly in business, is they're always looking for winner takes all. And we work really hard here to look for win-wins. And so this is an example of the opposite. This is a lose-lose. If you've got an employee that's been with you 3 years, 5 years, 6 years, 8 years, they're a good employee and they quit, that is a lose-lose. You're losing and they're losing. Like if it could have been avoided and you could have retained the employee, almost certainly both of you would have been better off. So the biggest mistake I see organizations and businesses make when someone quits is they fail to self-reflect and self-evaluate when that event occurs. And the more senior the employee and critical of a role they fill, the more important it is to do that self-reflection, self-evaluation. Now, I think you should do it I think if your cleaning person quits or your entry-level CAD tech quits, you should still self-reflect and self-evaluate. So every time someone quits, especially when you own a small business, you need to stop. Remember, that's an important signal. You need to stop and you need to self-reflect. And you need to ask yourself, what is this telling me? What is this signal telling me? So here's what people do. Here's what business owners and managers do. They add a second mistake to the first mistake. The first mistake is getting in a situation where a good employee quits. The second mistake is they don't learn from it. They're putting one big mistake on top of another big mistake. And I've seen this happen over and over and over and over again to different places I've worked. And I just want to be clear here. As a business owner, this is costing you money. I don't think there's anything that happens in a small business that costs more money in the long run than having good employees quit. So pay attention. Don't miss this signal. Right? This is important. Okay, that brings us to the second main point of the episode, which is how do you determine the causes of this? That's why you have to self-evaluate and self-reflect. You want to determine the actual cause of the quit. Why is the person quitting? Now, to be honest with you, it's hard to do that. It's hard to determine the actual reason why someone is quitting. And I didn't expect this. When I first started managing people, this is not something I expected. And I've learned that it's hard to figure out the real reasons why somebody's leaving. So why is it hard? It requires honesty. And it requires honesty both on the part of the employer and the part of the employee. And what I found is, now you would think that an employee would be honest with you when they're leaving, because what do they have to lose? But they're often not. They're often not honest with you. And it's not that they're dishonest. It's just there are some really important reasons where even when they're quitting, they may not want to tell you the truth. So we're going to do a PYBO team extra on that. We'll talk about some of the reasons why they might not want to be honest and what you could do as a boss to try and create an environment where you can get as honest. You can get feedback that's as honest as you can possibly get because that's important. So it requires honesty. You don't always get that. It's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for you as a boss and for your company to self-reflect. It's uncomfortable. People in your business might feel like they're being attacked or threatened when you go through that process of self-reflection. That's another reason why it's hard. If you're going to gain anything out of that, people got to own their mistakes, and that's hard. And the other reason it's difficult to determine the causes is there's usually more than one cause. So it's usually not one thing. It's almost always more than one thing. And so that makes it a little more complicated, right? That's why I said determining the causes, not the cause. There are usually more than one cause. So how might you do that as a boss? How might you determine the causes of a quit? So I've got a couple things you could do. The first is ask. You'd be surprised how many employers don't ask. Sorry, I didn't mean to bump the mic there. So you have to ask. Ask the team member, why are they leaving? Ask their coworkers, why do you think this person quit? Ask the supervisor, why do you think you're losing somebody from your team? Ask HR what they think. Ask all those people. You need to ask the question. It just blows my mind how many companies just don't even ask. Like, you go to the exit interview and it's all about getting all the paperwork signed, and nobody makes any real effort to determine the actual cause of the quit. Like, come on, HR, like that's an example of how HR really fails in big organizations. Like, they're so obsessed with the paperwork that they forget their real purpose, which is to manage the human beings in the business, right? So don't make that mistake. Ask people why the person is leaving. The second thing I think you can do is just review a list of the common reasons or causes. What are some common reasons why people change jobs? You can find that information on the internet. What are some common reasons? And then ask yourself, do we think any of these apply in this particular situation with this person that's leaving? So I'm just going to I'm going to run down a quick list. So what are some reasons why people might leave your survey business? We talked about a couple of them. They had a personal change or a life change, right? So I had a young lady work for me. She had a baby and decided she wanted to be a mom. That's okay. Your business changes. Sometimes that needs to happen. I'm not saying don't change your business because you're afraid people are going to quit, but understand how your business is changing and the way that will impact your people. Sometimes there's a poor fit. Sometimes people leave because they got a bad boss. Their boss is a jerk. That's one of the most common reasons. That's a big problem for you as a business owner. So you got to fix that. Sometimes people have a bad boss. Sometimes people have the perception that they're being compensated unfairly. Now, it could be they're actually being compensated unfairly, or it could be just their perception. But either way, that's a problem, and you need to address it as an owner. And as on a side note, if one person has that perception, probably more than one person in your organization has that perception. So that's a big problem. They may perceive that they have a lack of opportunity to make career advancement. Again, that might not actually be true. Might be the perception, but either way, it's a problem. It could be just uncertainty about the future. It could be you have a toxic culture. It could be they have a bad coworker. Those are all common reasons why people leave. So run down a list like that and ask yourself, what do I potentially think from this list could apply in this situation? I think that's a helpful exercise. What I want to do, guys, if I remember, we'll do a separate episode in the future on all of those. How many are there? 8? There's 9. 9 things. We'll do an episode where we talk for a few minutes about all 9 of those and what that might tell you about your business and what you might need to do about it, because I think that would be really important. So we'll try and do that. I'll try and do that in the next few weeks. Okay, so you're going to determine the cause. You're gonna have some self-reflection, which is hard, but you need to do it. You're gonna self-evaluate. You're gonna try and determine the causes. Okay, and then the last thing I want you to do is look for patterns. That is critically important. If there's only one thing you remember from this episode, it's that I want you to look for patterns when people quit. So you have to ask this question. Are you losing people from your business for the same reasons? If the answer to that question is yes or maybe, you have to stop it. You have to. It is like a deep cut with major blood loss. As a small business, you cannot allow that to continue. It will ruin your company. If you've got a common occurring pattern that's leading to quits, you have to fix it. It is the most important job that you have as a business owner. Nothing you can do in your business is more important than figuring out that pattern and putting a stop to it. So I can't emphasize that enough. So, one person quits, all right, you go through the process, right? The second person quits, man, you need to really look at that. And I'll just tell you a couple stories. I worked at Safeway for 6 years when I was going to college. I think I started working there when I was 15, and I left when I was 22. So it was 6 or 7 years. And I noticed a really disturbing trend there. By the time I left, it was a horrible place to work, by the way. And that was a long time ago. I don't know, Safeway may be a better place to work now, but when I was there, it was a horrible place to work. And that wasn't just my store. Like, it was a horrible company to work for. And I noticed as I got to the end of my tenure there that we were having employees that had worked at Safeway for 20 or 25 years were quitting. And even as a young man, even at 19 or 20, I saw that and I was like, that's not good. Right? Like, I didn't know anything about business, but even at 19 or 20, and I was an idiot at 19 or 20. Like, even as a 20-year-old idiot, I looked at that and was like, that's not good. Like, I remember our floral department manager quit. She'd been there 25 years. Our bookkeeper quit. She'd been there 20 or 25 years. Like, that work environment was so horrible that they were losing people with decades of time at the business. And I remember thinking to myself, that is not a good sign, right? So you got to look for those kinds of patterns. I'll tell you another story. When I left a big company that I worked for as a surveyor, and I ended up on the phone with the human resources lead, and this is a 500-person company, and I ended up on the phone with the lead HR person because I was a mid-level manager there. I don't know, I was 3 or 4 levels down from the executive managers. But I was a mid-level manager. I was 4 or 5 levels up from the bottom, and 3 or 4 levels down from the top. So I quit. It was a fairly big deal, and the director of HR called me. I was a licensed surveyor, and they were having a hard time hanging on to licensed surveyors, and so, he was concerned that he was losing a licensed surveyor. So he called on the day I actually got fired. He called me on the day I got fired, and he said, hey, can I talk to you for a few minutes? And I said, yeah. And he said, can you tell me a little bit about what happened? He said, I'm really disappointed that we're losing you. He said, we have a really hard time getting licensed surveyors, and now I'm losing you. And He said, I need to understand what's going on. So this guy did his job, right? He was more worried about why I was leaving than he was worried about the paperwork. And I'm not going to tell you the whole story I told him, but I explained, what was going on, why I thought I ended up getting fired. And he said, I want to tell you something. He says, I've known for a couple years that there was a problem with your boss. And he said, I also know that there is a problem with your boss's boss, because I worked for both of them. He said, and you're probably the third or fourth licensed surveyor I've tried to put in this position that I've lost after about a year or two. And he said, this is a huge problem. And he says, I want to apologize to you. I said, why? You don't owe me an apology. He says, nope. He says, I do. I owe you an apology. He says, I should have been over there to check on you. He said, and not just once. He said, you've been here, year and a half. He said, I should have been over there to see you 3 or 4 times already, find out how things were going, talk to you about your relationship with your boss and with your boss's boss. He said, and I didn't do my job. He said, I got busy. He said, I got sidetracked with other stuff. He said, but you were a really critical person filling an important role that I can't seem to fill. And he said, I screwed up. He said, I think you're the kind of person, if I'd have done my job right, we could have worked this out. He said, I failed. And he said, I apologize. And I was speechless. I'd never had anybody tell me that before, and I didn't even know what to say. So I was probably quiet for a while, and then I can't remember exactly what I said, but I told him, I appreciate that, and I'm sorry that this is how things panned out. I said, I don't think there's anything we can do about it now. He's like, no. He said, I agree with you. He said, I think it's too late. He said, but I have a favor to ask, and I said, sure. What's the favor? He said, you got a lot of people, a lot of people in the industry, and he said, a lot of people follow you on social media. He said, I'm going to commit to you. I'm going to do whatever I can to make sure that you get treated well on the way out. He said, can you do me a favor and not trash talk our company, with your connections? He said, I know you have the ability to do that. I'm asking you not to do it. He says, I have a really hard time already filling surveyor positions here, and he said that's just going to make it almost impossible. He said, if you would do that for me, he says, I know, he said, I know I don't have the right to ask you that, but I think you're a good person, and I'm asking if you would extend me that professional courtesy. And I said, yeah, I will. I said, I will avoid from talking about what happened and airing the dirty laundry. I said, I don't think that's a super professional thing to do when you quit anyways. And I said, I appreciate the phone call today. I said, nobody's ever had this kind of phone call with me. And I said, so yeah, I'll do that for you. And you know what? I was very careful about what I said about my exit from that job. And that we had a situation come up a few months later where I needed some help wrapping up some stuff that I had my name on there. And I was having trouble, and I called him, and he got it taken care of for me. So what a beautiful example of how to handle a quit. And now, I know that he ended up leaving that company not too long after I did. A couple years after I did, he left. I don't know where he is now, but I tell you what, if the guy showed up at my front door tomorrow and needed a favor, I would help him out. Because he was willing to do the self-reflection, and he was willing to be honest with me, and he owned his mistakes. And that made it, when you get fired, it hurts. It damages your self-worth and your self-esteem, and it makes you question your value as a person, even though it shouldn't. It does. And I was dealing with some of those emotions, and it was stressful. But you know what? He helped me understand that it wasn't all my fault, and that was a very kind thing that he did that he didn't have to do. He didn't have anything to gain from that. I was leaving. So anyways, that's a good example of how HR can really make a difference. And now I didn't get fired there, but I didn't quit there. I got fired, but it was like a quit, a little bit like a quit, because I knew it was coming. So, identify patterns. And I'm gonna try and do a PYB OTM extra where I talk about what kind of patterns am I talking about, and how can you detect those if you have 2 or 3 or 4, if you have multiple quits, especially from the same team or department. What things do you need to look for, and how can you draw lessons? And I'll use an example. Okay, then the last thing I wanted to tell you in this section is, after you identify the patterns, if you do, and you should, if you identify patterns for multiple quits, you need to monitor. Don't just identify the pattern and then walk away. Monitor. And that's before and after you make any fixes. So if you think you found a pattern, monitor before you make a fix, then make a fix, and then monitor after to make sure that your fix is effective. All right, so the last point in the podcast episode today, the last section is the right way to respond. Now, there is a wrong way to respond when somebody quits. I'm going to try and do a PYBO team extra on the wrong way so we can talk about that. But I wanted to end on a positive note. So what is the right way to respond? Again, I'm talking about a situation where somebody's leaving and it's a good employee. It's a good team member. And they come in and they say, I'm leaving. That's hard as a boss. I don't know if employees understand how hard that is on a boss. It's hard for employees. It's hard on the boss too. So here's 5 things that you can do to react or respond in the right way. Number 1, control your emotions. I know that's hard. Do it anyways. Do not let your emotions get the better of you. And I'll tell you, because I don't want to feel like a hypocrite, the last time somebody quit our age, I got emotional. And I regret it because it meant I didn't handle things the way I wanted. I was super caught off guard. I was surprised. I didn't think the person was leaving for a good reason. I got emotionally attached to the team member more than I should have. And I took it really hard, and I got really upset, and that was a mistake, and I regret it, and I'm going to try not to let it happen again. So control your emotions. I know it's hard, but you have to really work on that. It's harder for some of us than others. If you're kind of you got a cool head and you're kind of a mechanical person that doesn't get overly attached, it's a little bit easier. I tend to be a hothead, and I tend to get, strong emotional attachments to people I work with and care about, and so it's hard for me. And so I have to work on it. So number 1, control your emotions. Number 2, ask politely for feedback. We talked about that, right? Ask. So ask politely for feedback. I'm going to do a PYBO team extra on what I think you can do to handle an exit interview well. I do think exit interviews can be constructive if they're done properly, and so I want to talk a little bit about that. Number 3, treat them generously. I can't emphasize enough to you how important that is. Treat people generously on the way out. When someone quits, that is not the time to get petty. It just isn't. It just leaves a horrible taste in their mouth. And by the way, the rest of your team is watching how you treat people when they leave. If you treat people poorly when they leave, what it results in is people sneaking around when they're looking for another job, and that doesn't help you. That's not what you want. So treat them generously. We try and do that here. I'll just give you an example. I had somebody that came to work for us that didn't work out. It just wasn't a good fit. And when they left, I gave them 2 weeks' pay when they left. And I didn't have to. I didn't have to do that. They didn't ask for it, but we did it because we wanted to give them a little bit of a cushion on the way out, and we understood that it was just their exit was the result of a poor fit. It wasn't because they didn't make an effort. We had another situation where we had an employee that was dealing with some stuff in life, and they were just having a hard time, and they said, hey, I just can't do this right. I can't deal with what I got going on in my life and work full time. And we said, no problem, we understand. And the employee said, would I be able to come back? If I get things sorted out and figure out what I want to, figure my life out, would you have a conversation with me about coming back? We said, absolutely. Yeah. We said, absolutely. Not only will we have a conversation with you, but we're going to check in with you every twice a year just to see how you're doing. And we cared about this person, a good employee. So treat them generously. Don't do like the story I told you in the beginning and try and blackmail people or hold them for ransom or strong arm them or bully them. It's just a really horrible way to do business. So number 4, leave the door open. I always tell people, if they're good employees especially, I always tell them, hey, we'd love to have you back. And I tell them, I can't guarantee you when you call me that I'll have a spot, but man, if you call me, we will take a hard look, and if I can make a spot, we will, because good employees are hard to find. So I always try and leave the door open, and we've had people come back. And I think we might, in the future, we might again have people come back. And that's good. That's a vote of confidence in your business, right? And the only reason people will come back is if you treat them well on the way out, right? So that's why you treat them generously and you leave the door open. And then the last thing, number 5, is ask how you can help them. And that could be different things. It could be a reference letter. I always ask people if they want a reference letter when they leave. Even if they have another job lined up, I'm like, do you want a reference letter? Are there things we can do to help get you off on the right foot at your new job? Are there other things we can do? Do you need to stay on the dental insurance for a couple months? What is it? You tell us what we can do to help you with this transition. And what I would remind you there is your goal in this situation is to create an ambassador for your business or organization, right? You want that person to leave and you want them to go other places and say, RH was one of the best places I ever worked, and if you ever have an opportunity, I encourage you to go to work there. That's what you want. You want an ambassador. And I try and tell people, my employees, if you have to leave, I don't want to lose you, but if you have to leave or you decide to leave, we want that. We want to make that transition super smooth, and we want it to be a positive experience for you. And we want you to tell people that working at RH was one of the best things that ever happened to you. That's our goal. If you leave here and you can't say that, I have failed as a leader, personally failed. And then I think I probably have a couple people that would tell you RH was not one of the best things that happened to me in my life, and that is a failure that I own, and I am not proud of it, and I regret it, and I don't ever want it to happen again. So I think that's how you should view this. So I told you I would end with a positive story. This episode's been a little longer. I appreciate you guys hanging in there with me. So I'm going to tell you the story about a friend of mine. His name's Mikey. I haven't talked to Mikey for a while. When I was scripting this episode, I thought I need to give Mikey a call. But Mikey was a good guy, good surveyor, LSIT that worked for me. It wasn't at RH. It was at a different job. And I was training him and mentoring him. I knew he was going to get licensed. He was a great hand, just a good guy, like a good human being and a good worker, hard worker. And he knocked on my office door one day and he said, "Can I talk to you for a few minutes?" And I said, "Sure, come on in." So he came in and shut the door. I said, "What's going on?" He said, "I got another job and I need to give you my 2 weeks notice." And I was devastated. I was devastated. I was so devastated that I think my mouth probably hung open for a little bit. Part of the reason I was devastated is I didn't think that, I had no idea that he was thinking about a different job. And the other reason was he was just such a good hand. He was my right hand. And I was devastated. And after I kind of regained my composure a little bit, I said, I'm really sorry to hear that. I said, tell me what's going on. Where are you going to work, and how did this happen, and is there anything I can do to change it? And he said, look, I want to let you know, part of the reason I'm leaving is there's some issues here that started way before you came to work here. So he had worked there for a few years before I got hired, and then came in as his boss. He said, "Look, I have some issues here that predate you, and has nothing to do with you, and you can't fix them." So he said, "No, there's nothing you can do to change my mind." But the other thing he says is, I'm going to work. He says, "I'm going to work at a job where I'm basically going to be surveying right outside of Yosemite National Park." He said, "It's a good job, pays good, it's close to where I live, and man, I get to survey in Yosemite." And I was like, "Mikey, wow." I said, "That sounds like the opportunity of a lifetime." He said, "It is." He said, "There's only a handful of people that ever get the chance to have a survey job like this." I said, "That's fantastic." I said, "I'm so happy for you." I said, "Do me a favor, find out if they have any other openings." And we kind of laughed. I was teasing him a little bit, but I was like, "That's a fantastic opportunity, man." And I said, "I don't want you to turn it down." I said, "You need to take that job." I said, "Especially if you think you're having issues here." I said, "That's a fabulous, fantastic opportunity. It's the kind of job I would dream about." I said, "You have to take it, man. I understand." I said, "Let me know what I can do to help make this a good transition." And he shook my hand and he said, "You've been a great boss, and I appreciate working for you." And he went to work surveying outside of Yosemite. And that was years ago. That was probably 10 years ago. He's still at that job. he just has an amazing survey job, and it was really hard for me to lose him, but I was so happy for him, and I'm still happy for him. And here I am, in a way different place in my career and my life, and you know what? He made the decision that was good for him and his family, and I'm happy that he did it. In the short run, it was hard for me, but in the long run, it was good for him, and I'm happy that he made that decision. So that's how you want to handle a quit. If you can. That's one of the times in my life when I lost a good team member, but I handled it well. And I want to make sure that I do that in the future, because there's, as I told you, there's been some times when I didn't handle it that well. So Mikey is kind of a highlight for me. I get a gold star for that one. He got a good job, and I handled the quit well. And I think if you talk to Mikey, I hope he would tell you I was a good boss and that I handled that with grace. I hope that's what he would tell you. So, and I hope he listens to this. Maybe I'll shoot him a text message or call him and let him know that I talked about him on the episode. So, thank you for listening. I know that went a little longer than our normal episode. It was an important topic. Let's see. Next episode, I think we're all the way up to 17, guys. Or this might be 17. Let me look. Yeah, no, next episode is 17. And what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about the difference between business development and marketing. So I had a friend of mine in the business ask me how you find new clients. That's a real challenge. It's a huge challenge. So I'm going to do a handful of episodes on that, maybe half a dozen, but I'll space them out a little bit. And I think the first episode I want to do is just what's the difference between business development and marketing. We're going to talk about lead generation and how you keep your proposal costs under control. We'll talk about content marketing and differentiation a little bit in an episode. So anyways, next week we'll do the difference between business development and marketing. And then I think the episode after that, we'll take a break from finding new clients, and I think I'm going to talk about leadership a little bit, and does your lead surveyor need to go in the field? There was a little bit of a testy LinkedIn exchange on that topic, so I thought it'd be good to follow up with an episode on that. And we can talk a little bit about the leadership model we try and follow here at RH, and why I think having the lead land surveyor in the field on his or her projects is an important thing to do, and it's a requirement here for our lead surveyors. I know not everybody runs that model, but I want to talk about why we run it, and we can talk about some of the trade-offs there, advantages and disadvantages. So my partner, Brian, makes me think a lot about what it means to be a good leader. And all three of us, so Brian and Danny and I think all work really hard to be good leaders and to help each other be good leaders. So we can talk about that. That's a topic I'll enjoy talking about with you guys. So if you have a particular topic you'd like to hear about in the next few weeks, let me know. Shoot me a text message or an email, and I'll get it in the hopper. And I appreciate you guys listening. Thanks. As we wrap up the podcast today, I want to do a couple things. I want to let you guys know where you can find the podcast, and I also want to let you know how you can support the podcast if you've enjoyed it. So let's start with that first thing. Where can you find the podcast? The podcast lives on the web at landonblake.com/PYBOTM. So if you go to my website, landonblake.com, up at the top, you'll find a menu. Go to Learn. It's the second link in the Learn menu. That'll take you right to the podcast. We've got links to download all the episodes there in MP3 format, and we also have the show notes. You can also find the podcast on YouTube, youtube.com/@PYBOTM. All of the episodes are also uploaded there. We have the podcast on Spotify, so you can find the podcast in all of those places. Second thing, how can you support the podcast? There's a few different ways you can do that. If you'd like to sponsor the podcast, reach out to me with an email, phone call, or text message. We can talk about your job opportunity for senior land surveyors, or if you have a high-quality product or service for land surveyors and mappers, we could also talk about that on the podcast. You can also subscribe to the podcast on YouTube or Spotify. Tell a friend about the podcast. Share one of your favorite episodes on social media for us. And then finally, if you'd like to make a real difference, you can go to the On Point workshops page at Patreon. We've got a tier there, membership tier for $20 a month. You can join and support the podcast, and you get extras. We call them PYBOTM extras there. So we try and do 1 or 2 extras from each episode, video and audio, as just a little thank you to the folks that support us for $20 a month. So if you got the price of a medium pizza in your budget and you want to support the podcast, the best way to do that is on Patreon. That will help me pay for Carly. Carly is the virtual assistant and digital marketing extraordinaire that helps me with all of the unseen back-end work on the podcast. So editing, maintaining the web page, doing the show notes, that kind of stuff. Carly's great. I'd like to keep her around. One way you can help me do that is by becoming a subscriber or a member on Patreon. So appreciate everybody that's done that already, and I also appreciate the thank you notes I've gotten from several of you for the podcast. That makes a difference. I know everybody's busy. I appreciate you guys taking some time out of your busy schedule to send a thank you note. So please support the podcast, and we will catch you guys on the next episode. Thanks.